I think there's a real hunger in the world now to understand yourself and to take action based on actually understanding how it works rather than just doing something because somebody told you to.
Yeah.
And so that's gone in parallel with our increased understanding of neuroplasticity, which has been the most exciting advance in neuroscience in the last few decades, but it's just ramping up all the time how much we understand how flexible the brain is at any age, any stage, and any mindset. So we understood that our brains don't stop growing when we physically stop growing around the age of 18. We understood that that was an active process till about the age of 25. And then we knew that between, let's say, 25 and 65, that if you put in sufficient effort, you could change, even things like people say, oh, well, that's just how I am, I can't change it. We started to understand that actually there are a lot of those things that you can change. But I think it's become even bigger than that now. It's, at a much later age than 65, and in a wider variety of things like personality, intelligence, emotional intelligence, physical capabilities. There's just so many things that you can change.
Yes. And I think why this is so important right now and why so many people are interested in, quote, manifesting something new is because the world has changed. A lot of jobs that we were educated for, that people were trained in, have gone away. People are not only having to, but being given the opportunity to kind of start fresh and create something from scratch even. I mean, the creativity really should be abounding right now, but there's so much patterning and fear in us that we're not able to squeeze the most out of it just yet. And that's why the kind of work you're doing, I think, is so important. So let's just do a fun little story about Phineas Gage. Share a little story with us about this man who had quite a tragic accident way back.
I mean, I feel deservedly so. He's possibly the most important person in neuroscience. So he was a railway worker. So his job was to thump in the stumps of wood that went along the railway. And one day that something went wrong, and one of these stumps of wood just went straight through his forehead and kind of, upwards through his head. So from my point of view, it went through his frontal lobe. And usually when we see changes in someone's frontal lobe, it affects their personality. But what was so poignant about Phineas Gage is that he changed as a person. The people that knew him said he's completely changed. But he kept these diaries, and he had moments of insights where he said, I don't know what's happening to me. I can see that I'm behaving differently. There's still glimpses of me inside. And, if a similar accident had happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, there would have been so much more that we could do and understand from it. But at that time, and for a long time since then, we could only try to glean information about what the different parts of the brain do when something goes wrong. So an accident like that, or a brain tumor, or a brain abscess, or a stroke. So that really started to make us realize that there are different parts of the brain responsible for different actions. And of course, it's become much more complex and sophisticated since then. But his story was a really, really pivotal one in neuroscience.
And what that's bringing to mind is the brain is incredible in finding workarounds. If something goes wrong in one area, other areas can also become compensatory, just like the heart. I mean, they've learned so much in the last decade or two about what the heart can do. Even with severe damage, it finds little pathways to work around and continue on. Give us an idea of what the brain can do despite what we may have done to it or accidents that may have occurred.
Well, let me start with a more shocking storyline than that, which is that a baby born with half a brain can live a completely normal life. So that kind of starts to show us the difference between a baby brain and then how that changes a little bit as we get older, and that plasticity isn't naturally there as much. But the potential for that plasticity in people that aren't using it at all it's almost like traveling around the world. If you've stayed in the United States for your whole life, imagine all the different countries you could go to. Imagine the adventures that you could have. And it's exactly the same in the brain. You can go to places in your brain that you haven't had to use because of your job or your social situation or the kind of sports that you choose to play. And you can basically reach greater heights in the areas of your brain that you already do use quite well. And neuroplasticity is all of those things. It's building on what could be a superpower. It's taking something that's, you're quite good at, but requires a bit of effort, and potentially also taking areas where you feel like you have no skills at all and actually making those development areas something more usable.
I hope you're enjoying this video, because if you are, there are dozens more like it on my site, all supported by people like you. So if you'd like to keep this work rolling in and join our community, just click on the Patreon button at reginameredith.com. That also gives you access to insider commentary, my live book club, and other live events with special guests. So join in. Thanks.
So what about the whole notion that we only use 5% of our brain? Because I think, first of all, the brain's terribly misunderstood. There's a difference between the brain and the mind, obviously, the greater mind, as we'll talk about. But when someone says that casually to you, oh, we're only using 5% of our brain, what does that actually mean? And why are we using our brains in such a limited way?
So I have a sort of a bag of neuro myths that I really dislike, and that's one of them. So you hear we only use 5% of our brain, or we only use 10% of our brain. There's a movie called Lucy, which is based on the premise that we only use 10% of our brain, and she mistakenly ingests a large amount of mind-expanding drugs that allow her to use, all of her brain. It's not quite like that. So we use different parts of our brains at different times for different things. And so let me make it really, really basic, which is that the brain is a small part of our body weight. It's tiny. It's just a few pounds, but it's the most energy hungry organ in the body. And it uses up 20 to 30% of the breakdown products of what you eat in a day. And when you're asleep, it is using up 20% of what you ate. So that already busts that myth sort of out of the water. The amount of activity that's going on, to the active process of falling asleep, of waking up, of everything that happens overnight, the cleaning of the brain. It's just that when you're focused on a certain task, you would be using certain pathways of your brain. And we naturally all have things that we do every day and some things that we don't do very often or don't do at all. But it doesn't mean that we can't access all of the parts of our brain. And in fact, the more we coordinate using different parts of the brain, the more that leads to imagination and creativity and innovation. So it's actually really important to actively be trying to use different parts of the brain at the same time.
Yet most people are we're stuck. In fact, you've been there yourself. You are highly educated. You're a neuroscientist, you're an MD, a psychiatrist. And even so, as brilliant as you were finding yourself stuck too, because of your own belief systems that this is what you're to do. This is your task in life. And really for you had to learn from the ground up the secret, how you begin breaking away from the things we're conditioned to do, we're told by society to do, and what our heart desires. And it seems that our hearts are weak right now. So many people, their hearts, they can't hear the heart anymore. And they can't hear those strong emotions of desire anymore. So just very briefly, give us a sketch of what happened when you were totally burnt out on supplying drugs for mental conditions and transitioned into being a coach in this field.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that we're in one of those periods of life again, where we've all been through a very stressful time recently with the pandemic, and it's affected our mental health, which has perhaps dampened that ability to dream big. But I see it very much as that this could either be a mental health crisis or a spiritual revolution. And, I personally had a point like that in my life where I had been a doctor for 7 years, a medical doctor practicing mostly in psychiatry, although I'd also done medicine and surgery. And a backstory from my childhood was that I was told in high school that I wasn't creative because I wasn't good at art. So all of my friends are creative, and a lot of them started to go freelance. And I remember thinking, that's amazing, but I could never do that. I genuinely believed I could never leave medicine and do anything else, because medicine's a vocational degree. It doesn't really train you to do anything else. And also that I had to be very, very detail orientated, because if I made one tiny error on a number on somebody's blood test results, that person could die in front of me. So I realized two things after I made the change, which was that having people around me who had achieved what I wanted to achieve was very, very inspiring and told my brain that it was possible. So I took that leap. There's obviously a very much bigger story around that, but I took the leap. I went freelance. I started, working in very different ways to how I had before. And I also learned around that time that my natural way of thinking was very big picture, but I had forced myself into being very detail orientated because of the job that I was doing. So there was a mismatch in many ways. One was this firmly held belief that was wrong. And the other one was that I was making myself use my brain in a way that wasn't to the best of its natural abilities. Now, I'm very proud looking back that I could do that because, I didn't realize how hard it was for me. But because it was hard, because it was against my natural skills, I became burnt out. And it was only really when I changed, although starting afresh in my mid-30s was difficult, that somehow it flowed. And that's what I would love for other people to feel, that there is something out there that's your version of that. Life just flows. And I do believe it's about understanding what your passion is and following that. And maybe going back to before that age in your childhood where somebody told you that you can't do something and trying to remember what it was that you actually wanted to do.
Yes. In fact, I did an event recently where I led this meditation. It's my very favorite one to lead because the group is so deeply impacted by it. And I call it my kindergarten meditation, where I take people back to when they were 5. And it's amazing how easy it is for us to connect with what we loved at 5. And then if you were to carry that forward to see how it was stomped out of us. Just innate things. And it doesn't mean you have to do them for money, but you have to do them for your own spiritual, not just growth, but joy and power, your own personal power.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you might also want to consider joining Patreon, which allows me to keep all of this content free and available to everyone. And if you're looking for like-minded souls, you might also enjoy my online community called Our Neighborhood. Links to join are in the description.